Hi, welcome back to Respectful Disagreement. My name is Austin Chadwick. I've been a software engineer for about 15 years, experienced wearing all different kinds of hats. And Peter Kretzmann is here as well. Peter, do you want to do a quick intro for yourself?
Yeah, I'm Peter Kretzmann. I'm a long-term IT person in many walks of life and know where all the bodies are buried.
Fantastic, fantastic. And so, yeah, we'll be talking about respectful disagreement. And today we'll be talking about a new topic about planning equaling estimating, which is fantastic that you all from the community on LinkedIn and Twitter voted up that as a topic you'd like us to see debate next. And so, but before we jump into that, I just wanted to jump back to the ground rules to talk about radical candor in the discourse pyramid. And so the goal for today, and for anyone else who responds to this content on social media or the internet, is to care personally, so to be kind and respectful, but challenge directly. So that's kind of the nice sweet spot of radical candor up here in the top right. And also stick to, if you're going to be trying to disprove or refute someone else, to stick to their arguments directly and have, counter argument with reasons, as opposed to just contradicting, saying you disagree without reasons, or starting to attack a person. So we definitely don't want to get down there into the bottom of the pyramid. And the one thing I was going to share with today on this note of ground rules was I like this quote from Aquinas, we must have goodwill for them both, those whose opinions we share and those whose opinions we reject, for both have labored in the search for truth and have helped us in finding it. And so I think for me, at least me personally, being in a debate or discussion like this really helps me learn. And so that's why I really appreciate it. Anything to add, Peter, on the ground rules before jumping into the topic?
That's it. I think you said it last time really well, that this is more important than anything substantive that we're talking about in a way. The tenor of the discourse is what counts. So, I don't want you to tell me or me to tell you you're wrong without, explaining that. And I don't want either of us to take offense if we're told we're wrong. And so that's kind of what this is all about. It's being able to express those ideas without it being a personal attack on anybody, and without getting to the lower levels of the pyramid of name calling and ad hominem remarks, et cetera. So, and I think we succeeded very well at that last time and in the other discussions we've had.
All right, awesome. Let's keep that goal. So to jump right into the topic, I'll hand it off to you, Peter, because I think I made the assertion last time, so you're making the assertion this time. So go for it.
Yeah, we're kind of alternating. At least we are for the first two. So there's a trend, right? We can extrapolate. So I'm taking the assertion today, and I'm throwing out the bold, but to me, indisputable, and we'll see the dispute here, assertion that doing non-trivial software development planning, so anything that is relatively meaty, always involves estimating in some form. And it's probably going to get us into a bunch of discussion about, well, what really counts as estimating and what doesn't. And so we'll see where that goes, because there's a lot of discussion to be had on that. So let's move on. And I've got several slides here that just kind of present a relatively structured argument of why I think this is important. Planning is heavily entwined, in my view, with estimating. In other words, I don't believe that you really can make a reasonable plan unless you incorporate some form of estimating. And I'm going to try to be arguing for that and hopefully convincing some people. It's kind of interesting in the very long discussions that have happened over Twitter and in the blogosphere about estimating and no estimates in particular. What's come down about that is when it gets this far and people are challenged about, well, planning, many end up dismissing that need for planning altogether. And I find that incredibly perplexing. And so unless people think I'm exaggerating about what people say, I'm just going to read off a few quotes just really quickly of what people have said. And that is, drop planning, you have more time to deliver. You should plan not to plan. Stop planning and start working. We don't need to anticipate the future except for the obvious or unavoidable. It's enough to focus on solving the problems of today with our current knowledge. Whoa, okay. Definition of a plan is a detailed description of what will happen if we can predict the future, which we can't, so it won't. And many of these come from thought leaders in the no estimate space. So I want to make sure I lay that out there, that this is a bone of contention, because sometimes I get the reaction that, well, planning, of course, we're not giving up planning. And we're going to talk about that. If you're not giving up planning, well, what do you call a plan then? So I want to make sure I put those quotes out there, not to belabor them, but just to make sure that there is this contention that planning isn't really necessary. So let's talk about sort of a ground principle for me as I think about it. From my perspective, everything, we're going to talk about what a plan is, we're going to talk about what an estimate is and what they aren't. And the fundamental tenet from my perspective, and I'd be interested to hear a counter argument to it, is everything we do in life, every single decision, that's based on some gauging that we're doing of bang for the buck, of likely cost versus benefit. And we do it rapidly sometimes, we do it intuitively sometimes, but we are always scoping out, as human beings, we are scoping out, is it worth it for me? Is the outcome, the likely outcome, worth the likely cost or risk? And again, we might make that decision in a heartbeat, or we might spend days or weeks making the decision about, which graduate school should I go to, or should I marry this person, or should I take this job or quit this job, or whatever. Those are really long decisions, but it's all based on bang for the buck. And note that cost, in my view, really importantly, includes opportunity cost. So if we decide to work on something, there's a whole bunch of things that we have implicitly or explicitly decided we are not going to work on because we're in the middle of doing this thing that we are working on. And so the important part of that from an estimating point of view is that both cost and benefit, if you're weighing cost and benefit, both of those are in the future. Both of those aren't exactly fixed or certain. They're uncertain things. And so you have to estimate both constantly, whether that's implicitly or explicitly, whether you write it down, whether you tell anybody, whether you admit to it, et cetera. So that's kind of my core philosophy. And I'd be interested if you can cite any meaningful, non-trivial counterexamples to that, whether you're assessing bang for the buck as part of what you're doing. From my perspective, people who declare that one can plan without estimating, whenever I ask for examples, I find one of two situations, usually the second. But the first one is, well, the thing that they're doing, nobody really cares when it's going to get done, what's actually going to get done. So anything goes. That's rare, but you do sometimes find that, Bill Gates, famously moved had a tree moved 6 inches, right? Because when he was building his house. And so he didn't really care how much it cost. I'm not Bill, but anyway. Or the second thing, the one that I find most often, is that the examples cited almost they actually have an implicit set of estimates behind the scenes. Somebody is making those estimates and it's just not being admitted to, or it's pretended that it's not really happening. It's a taboo topic for discussion. Oh no, we don't talk about how long it's going to take or what the size is here. We just don't do that. But someone's doing it somewhere, and to my mind, that's not very helpful. So let's talk a little bit about slide 2. You have moved on to it already, and jump in if you want to interrupt or counter. Obviously, I'll just go through what I'm talking about, what a plan is. So what is a plan? And this doesn't sound to me like it's a controversial thing, but from my point of view, it's some level of structured approach. You're getting something done, you need to do something, create something, achieve something. I'm not talking about a micro level thing. I don't have a plan for getting breakfast tomorrow. I'll wander into the kitchen, maybe I'll get a bowl of cereal, maybe I'll have a bagel, who knows, right? But if I'm going to do a sit down brunch for 10 of my best friends, I'd probably be making a plan. And so trivial things are not included here. When you make a plan, you break things down. Sometimes you do it minutely, sometimes you do it coarsely, you do steps, tasks, milestones, dependencies. And I know there are people out there that's like chalk on a blackboard when you mention those things, but I can't imagine doing anything of reasonable complexity that doesn't involve some level of thinking through things up front. What am I going to confront? What am I going to have to deal with? What is the relationship between those two things? I just came off, or I'm in the midst of, I guess, probably for the next weeks, months, a house move. So moved house, and the number, my wife and I sat down and brainstormed all the things that we were going to need to do to deal with outside entities, ourselves, our kid, the schools, whatever, and figure out what's going to happen when. And that was a plan. Mentally mapping, I like to call it, mentally mapping a path through the future. The future is uncertain. And it's not just a list. It's not just, okay, we have these 10 things to do, just, pick one, let's do it, whatever. There's almost always some level of sequencing, interrelationships, some kind of envisioned timeline, usually a dependence on timelines of some of them. And so you got to get item C done by a particular time to be able to do items D and E, or et cetera. So, it's kind of mom and apple pie. So if that's not a plan, if some kind of breakdown in steps and tasks and attaching it to some kind of outline or timeline, if that's not what a plan is, what is a plan? What do we, how can somebody say, well, we don't do those things, but of course we still plan. We don't ditch planning. That's really unclear to me, because a plan isn't just show up daily and do whatever comes up, right? So that's my definition of plan. And so again, trying to set the stage for the discussion. If you could go on to then quickly, what is an estimate? I'm not going to cite the dictionary definitions, et cetera. It's certainly an item of uncertainty, but it's something that you sit down and you think about to help you establish what the plan needs to be. Usually it's something like likely level of effort, size, sometimes timing. The estimate itself is not the plan. Okay, so you make a bunch of estimates and then you feed those into a plan, keeping in the picture sequencing and duration and what the interrelationships are, what the contingencies are. And since all of those are uncertain, all of them are in the future, all of them are estimated in some form. An estimate isn't only a team sitting around going 3 story points or 5 story points. No, I think it's 4.2. That's such a narrow definition of what an estimate is. An estimate for me is thinking through things that help you establish the plan, including size, but including many other things, risk and the like. So takeaway there, if you make a plan, you're mentally mapping a path through an uncertain future. It means you're estimating. And so maybe you don't write those things down. Maybe you don't even admit that you're doing it. Maybe you just say, well, we don't really do those things and we don't use any numbers. And, we figure it out as we go on gut. I'm going to talk about that in a second. That's estimating. So if you could move on then to the next one. I want to just make a couple of necessary notes about planning, because the word plan makes some people go a little crazy. They just don't like the notion of a plan. They think of it as a, 2,000 line Gantt chart or Microsoft project plan. And I've seen those, I've worked on those, et cetera. Not necessarily what I'm talking about, but I'm having something which represents context for what you're about to do and what the big bones of that project, that endeavor is. What are the assumptions? It embodies and gives context for what the assumptions are, impacts, ripple effects, and the like. And, I don't want to hear from anybody personally. To me, it's chalk on a blackboard for people to say, well, it's not agile. It's not agile to have a plan. Well, because one of the agile values is, we value responding to change over following a plan. There's nothing in there that says, we think plans are dog meat. We don't want to have plans at all. And so responding to change is a really important value, something I applaud, but it doesn't mean you dispense with plans. The other thing is that, and you hear this again and again, plans, oh yeah, if we have a plan, that means people follow it to the letter and they won't, it stops innovation and they, people stick to it. But no, there's nothing that says you stick to a plan. In fact, every plan I've ever worked on changed constantly, changed weekly, if not daily sometimes, depending on new information coming in. So it's not a guarantee. It's something which is a guideline for here's our best idea of how we're going to be able to do this. And it'll change tomorrow maybe, but then we'll know it changed because we can point to what it was before and what it is now. So last things here, what's the alternative to doing that? You go on gut, you just work in reactive mode and you just respond to whatever comes up, or you just don't ask, don't tell about, what the probable size or probable intentions are. And you just, someone's out there making it all come together. And sometimes that even works, right? But in my mind, communication is key, particularly in software. High focus on transparency. And because otherwise you get everybody on the endeavor with different assumptions, different expectations, even a different notion of what we're trying to achieve and end targets. The more you can actually put those in some concrete form and get a head nod about them and have people understand that, today we're changing this and we're changing it on purpose. That's, to me, transparency, and that involves some notion of working with estimates to bring those assumptions into the daylight. So my takeaway is no one can make a plan, because it's about the future, without gauging all those impacts of the individual plan elements. And that is, in fact, estimating. There are two things that are tied together. So my spiel.
Right on. Nice. Now that was very helpful description. And I think to kind of jump into what seems to be a counterexample in some ways, I'll jump to the next slide here. And I think what we might end up getting into later in the discussion is almost like a Socratic discussion of like, what is a chair? But instead of a chair, what is justice? It'll be like, what is an estimate? And we'll get down to those details of what you mean by estimate, what I mean by estimate. Maybe how, when I'm not thinking I'm estimating, I am, or maybe I'm not, so get into that whole discussion. But before jumping in to that, what I would like to do is present a real life example of planning and execution on two things. One is a more smaller, I estimated right there, boom. But retroactively, we saw it as a smaller thing. And then something that was more complicated or involved. So one was renaming a site for some software. And then another one was implementing a voice command for IoT, which is more involved. It's more complicated. There's more moving parts. And so the thing, I'm going to basically deliver these counterexamples and kind of run through some pictures of what this work looked like. And then at the end, I think the thing to talk about is the way we operated. Was it estimating or was it not? And I think that'll be the fun thing to talk with you, Peter. But anything before jumping in and just showing these examples?
No, I think that's great. By voice command IoT, you mean basically using voice control for a particular device.
Right. Yeah. Speaking to some sort of, something that takes in voice commands, and that goes through the cloud and controls something in the internet and causes some hardware to do something, right? So instead of like clicking a button, it's done through voice, right?
Sure.
Yep. Yeah, right on. So I'll go ahead and share it. Oh, go ahead, Peter. Yeah.
No, I was saying that's how I do my kitchen timers now exclusively, right? Siri or Alexa, set a timer for whatever.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yep. All right. So I'll go ahead and jump right in. So the first one, I think to get going will be a little more straightforward, but hopefully we'll get the idea of how, at least I've been operating lately with planning and execution and delivery. And so for this one here, there's a mobile app and it has something called a site and you can rename it. And so the request came in like, hey, when people first name their site, and they mess it up and they want to rename it, it's like, should be able to rename this thing, right? If they want to change it. And so we're like, okay, great. So here's a page where we add a button to edit it. And then this is going to call into some sort of back end. And so we laid out some things we think we'd have to do for that. We talked about it with the customer or the product person. And they're like, yeah, something like that sounds good. And then we just started building. So we laid it out a little bit. We're using something that I call graphical Kanban, which is basically, it kind of shows the different pieces of the technology or the domain and what's going on in the interrelationships. And we just kind of update it as we go along with the status. And so like proof of concept is yellow, checkbox is green, is all the way done and ready. That piece is ready for production. The spinner's in progress. And then there's some sort of performance optimization that can go on as well. So for us, we had a quick chat. Okay, we need to rename a site. All right, it'll maybe look like something like this. Let's get started. And then we were like, oh yeah, and so it's going to have to go to the back end because the back end is going to have to authenticate the request, and it's going to have to perform the rename in the data store. And so we're like, okay, yeah, there's a back end component. And then we identified that, and then we started working. And I can't remember why, but we started on the back end. We finished the authentication piece. We started working on the part of the code that changes the back end store. And then we finished that up, and then we started working on the front end. And so maybe a little bit of time has gone by. We show the customer, the product person, like, yep, yeah, here's the new screen. We've delivered it only to you in production, so only your user can see it. Here's the button. Here's what it looks like. Try it out. Right now, it doesn't do anything, but let us know what you think of the look and feel of the button. And while we're working on calling the back end. And so that feedback loop started to happen. The back end, the front end called the back end, and then that all worked. And then we did some cleanup and refactoring and turned those items in the front end and back end green, so they're good to go. We didn't have a back button yet, so the user was stuck on this screen. So this obviously wasn't delivered to everyone else in production, but the customer or product person was testing out, saying, yep, seems to be doing what I'm expecting. And then we realized, like, oh, there's a back button. Oh, we got to update this data over here. So, and then we kept on working in a similar fashion day by day. And then we finished out that the impacts to the other screens. And at the end of the day, we completed all these items, and the feature was delivered to production.
What was this quick interruption? What was the time span roughly from the time you started the thing to the time it was basically done?
I don't recall exactly, but retroactively, I would say it was about a week or two for the whole thing. Yeah, I think it was something like that. And yeah, which is definitely a smaller example. And then that, I picked that for the first example because it kind of gives you an idea of the flow. Like, hey, we have some ideas of what to do. We lay them out in a drawing. We start working on them. Every day we get feedback on what we built the previous day. And then once all the pieces are together, that's an usable increment, we will turn that flag on in production for others to use. And then obviously a more complicated example would be the IoT voice command type of thing, right? And so this is showing the end result of a bunch of work. I think it was over, there's about, actually I did look at this recently. This was over about a month and a half for, I think, MMVP, and then I think it was a couple weeks to deliver MVP, so to speak. And so you can see the diagrams broken up into those several pieces.
A couple of months all told, or?
What's that?
You say a couple of months total then, or
yep.
1.5? Yeah.
Yep, it turned out to be a couple months total. But so it was the similar flow as before, where we're like, okay, this is more involved now. We have several things. We have like a device that's listening to someone talk. That goes to a chunk of code here. That code needs to talk to this server over here, and that talks to backend code here. And that backend code talks to a database, and then that goes over the cloud to a device. And then the response comes back and then tells the user what happened, kind of thing. But the progression was the same as before with the other one. It was just, it went on longer because there were more pieces and things involved. And so we just laid out like, okay, on the device part, here are the things we need to do. And then as we went along, more things got added as we discovered them. And along the way, each part was being tested. So in the beginning, it was maybe like, hey, you can say the voice command and it responds back with a canned response, no matter what you say. And then later on, it might, start actually doing stuff, or saying it's doing stuff, but it's not quite there. Or it does a very simple command to the IoT device, like simple on off or something like that. And then, so each day, or as much as we could, we were getting feedback from our product or customer person and some beta users. And it went through a very similar progression until we got to a point where we hit the first line, released that to more beta users. And then we discovered through feedback that we really need a few more pieces for this to go to everybody. And then, so we added a couple more pieces that added some extra commands for the user to say. And then it went out to everybody else. We started to identify potentially what the users might want after that, based on feedback. But then priorities shifted and we left this work and went on to something else. And so that's some concrete examples of cases of planning. And I think if I were to step back from the concrete example and speak to some of the things you said, it would be at least the way we worked here wasn't no planning or some of those sayings that you said. It was planning, but just enough planning to do the next thing. And at least for the people involved in making the software, there wasn't a lot of, and maybe, so now I'll bring this back to you. I would stand firm on that the people making the software, the people actually completing the work and delivering it, there was no time estimates or there were no size estimates at all in the conversation amongst ourselves or with the product or customer type people. So show me where we were doing that, I suppose.
Tell me how it was decided that you'd work on this.
Right.
Let's use the bigger example first, but really both. Okay, who decided that and with what input?
Yeah, so the person who decided this was important to work on was outside the team making and delivering the software that accomplished this. And I'm not sure exactly what process they went through. Since some on our team have good abilities for facilitating, we'd help facilitate that discussion. So we would say like, hey, we finished the last thing. What do you think we would work on next? That'd be the most beneficial. And then they would come out and say like, okay, well, we've been hearing from users or sales and the things that they need to deliver the most value for our customers and, make money and those kind of things. And then they would throw out like 10 items and then we'd facilitate a conversation where they say like, oh, this one, not that one, this one, not that one. Okay, we have these top 5. How do we pick which one's the most important after that? And so the conversation kind of went like that. We are involved in it and we question and we have some radical candor on it and we provide some feedback into that decision. But ultimately the team making it and delivering it does not make that decision. Does that help?
Yeah. And I wasn't so much focused on the making of the decision. What's interesting to me is the back and forth that you described, because if I were this external important person that you described coming in,
yes.
And I have 2 things I want done, and let's even use your 2 examples. One is just a site rename or not a site rename, site rename. And the other is this Alexa thing, right?
Yeah.
So I took a programming class in early college, and I'm convinced that both of these could be done in a couple of days, right?
Yes.
I mean, is there any notion coming in of how big is this thing? How do we weigh it against the other? Usually in any company of any complexity, there's 14 other things weighing, for contention about what we're going to do. And sure. As you discuss that, it's really hard for me to firmly believe, no disrespect intended, that there was no discussion of likely size, that site rename was relatively easy on the level of whatever, and that Alexa thing is, if you do that, you're signing up for the team being consumed with that for some length of time. Even if length of time is not mentioned, it's like the widening of the eyes, the raising of the eyebrows,
yes.
the expletives being mentioned, perhaps. I don't know. It's like this is complicated.
Yeah. And I think that discussion happened. And in these 2 particular cases, the way the relationship we kind of built with the customer product person, it started out that relationship more with them asking for those kind of things, and it's slowly not gone away completely, but it slowly became less of a thing. I think just because of the relationship developed where every day we show them what we're working on and what's working and what's not, and if you want us to keep working on this thing, right? And so there have been, so usually the way we talk about it is, hey, is this a worthwhile R&D thing? Is this a moneymaker, or is this a value provider, right? And if from their perspective, who are in tune with the customers and sales and all that, they say, yes, we just start working on it, and then we share with them our discoveries. And so, yes, I think complexity was a factor, because they'd be like, okay, we want to do this voice command thing, and be like, okay, great. we'll start investigating. And I kind of remember that on day one, we started investigating, and then we started drawing this. And I think we maybe didn't draw the whole thing on day one, but we drew maybe like this, a third of it as far as the things involved in making it happen. And then we shared that, and became evident right away, like, okay, there's a lot involved to make this happen. You know what I mean? There's vendor code that we interact with that we have to modify, or at least configure. And then there's our own code we need to write. And so it became evident after one day of laying it out and trying to build these pieces that it was more involved. And so I think, and maybe this is the part where you say, gotcha, you're estimating, is we would be like, oh yeah, this is involved. This involves several layers of components. It's going to involve, to do these different commands, we're going to have to handle each one. So I think it became evident by them seeing all the tasks start showing up next to each component that, hey, this one's more involved, and we're going to invest in this and see how it goes. And most of the time they say, keep going. But there has been cases where they said, you know what, we've put a week into this and I see this exploding to be humongous. So we're just gonna stop here and we're gonna go work on something else. So that gives you a sketch of how the conversation usually goes. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, again, it's not about a gotcha, and so please don't misinterpret me. But it is about pointing out that yes, you're doing it interactively, collaboratively, which is great. I certainly applaud that, right? But you are scoping out the size of the effort. How big is this? How many things get written up on the whiteboard? Oh, wow, there's a lot. This other one, there was only 8 things that you wrote up on the whiteboard, and this one has 49, or whatever. Right. And so in the end, so you had, yes, maybe they would have stopped it after a week if they went through and your initial forays, made it seem like it wasn't going to happen well, or couldn't be done, or would be too time consuming. But you described something that basically took 2 months, right? Did they know? Did they care? What if it had taken 6 months? What if it had just kept lingering on and on? 8 months, would they have pulled the plug after 6 months and say, okay, that development team didn't produce anything we can actually use? Because going to beta testers doesn't count, right? I mean, it's helpful, it's useful, it's a good step, but it doesn't count as actually giving value to your end user customers, right?
Right.
And I mean, we can argue all day long about whether that's an estimate, but yeah, of course it was an estimate. Somebody figured out that this was worth doing, that there was bang for the buck, and that probably it wasn't going to be a 2-year effort. It wasn't like, designing a self-driving car, whatever, which Apple has struggled with since, 2010 or whatever. But it was something that could be accomplished in some sort of reasonable time frame. And they probably mentally, again, maybe not sort of consciously, they figured, well, if it went twice what I'm thinking, okay, I'd be okay with that. But boy, it's really going to be embarrassing if it goes 8 times what I'm thinking. And somebody's thinking something, because otherwise, the opportunity cost alone, right? Someone comes to them and says, we got this team working here, but we really want this other thing done instead, or going into it, they've got 15 things that they're choosing among.
Yeah. And
so someone determined that it was going to be a reasonable length of time, that it was worth the bang for the buck, that where bang was estimated and buck was estimated. And whether or not the team was involved in that is kind of a red herring, because in my mind, if the team was involved, because you had these discussions, these collaborative discussions. So yes, of course the team was involved, but even worse would be if the team were not at all involved, because somebody would be out there making assumptions on, oh, okay, well, I took this programming course in college and this is going to be easy. Right? And so from my point of view, that happens, and it happens behind the scenes everywhere. And what I honestly don't understand about the no estimates movement and the anti-planning thing that comes out of the no estimates movement is that, why wouldn't you want to plan, at least to some degree, what you think you're getting into? Mm-hmm. And if you think if you're going to do that, how can you deny that you're having to make some estimates or judgments about what's coming at you in terms of cost and benefit?
Right.
I simply don't understand that in any way. And if anybody can explain it to me in the comments or in the reactions to this, I'd love to hear it. But just saying that estimating and planning is taboo, or just we should plan not to plan. Plans are terrible. Foresight. We had the leading guy of No Estimates said foresight is impossible. Mm-hmm. Really? How do we ever get out of the caves? It's like, how do we ever sort of start doing agriculture? Foresight was completely impossible.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think I will grant you on a few points and then maybe challenge you on a few others. So for one, I'll say, like I said last time, I don't speak for the trees on everyone in the No Estimates movement. So this is just Austin speaking his opinion.
Right.
Is that what I will grant is, I think some sort of estimation is happening somewhere in the whole system, right? So like you said, someone is saying, hey, this feature or that feature is worthwhile to invest in and run experiments on, right? And so there was estimated value and results that this person was thinking. And so I think I will grant that. I think what I will hold to, though, is if you do a lean value stream map, so this is kind of leaning on lean engineering, of what things are value adding and what things are non-value adding, and you, instead of looking at the whole system, which is ideal, but for now, at least for a team that is creating and delivering, the value of them attaching to each component on this diagram, let's say a size number, you could t-shirt size, or you could story point, or you could even do a true time size, like 1 day or whatever, to each task before it was started. If you add that to your value stream map and you say, okay, that's how we do development, is we do that for each task or card or high level thing, maybe for this thing overall. And then you do your work. And so there's some time, there's some cost to the time it takes to do that for the development team and the team creating it. And there are side effects that I've observed, not universally in all cases, but side effects I've observed in several contexts, that the act of doing that has side effects on people making trade-offs to meet their estimates. Even if people are coaching them and telling them, hey, I don't care if you meet your estimate, do a quality job. I've seen it again and again in previous contexts where people will be like, I'm evaluated as an engineer by whether I meet my estimate, or at least I perceive I am, and I don't care what you tell me, leadership or coaches or whatever, I'm gonna hit it. And that often means cutting quality corners and doing things like that. And so I've observed these side effects and also the cost of doing the estimate within the development team. And then I've been able the last few years run the experiment of not having that in the process. And I've seen a night and day experience between that cost going away, which was substantial, especially over a long period of time. The engineering hours being put into the size and the relative, however you do your time or size estimates. And then also seeing the side effects, seeing a large amount of what I think in lean would be called waste, because the user of the product doesn't care about what the engineer thought it would take. It's a non-value adding thing. Maybe you'll argue it's a necessary non-value adding activity. But at least from the user's perspective, it's non-value adding. With that taken away, it just freed up way more time for development, and a lot of side effects went away in the context that I've been in previously. And so what do you think in regards to granting that the overall system, someone is doing some level of estimating, but that the team internally is not?
I was trying to react to that before when I said that the team is not, but someone is doing it. And that's not necessarily a good thing for the team, right? Because expectations are out there being set or being formed, rightly or wrongly, without the input of the people who are actually doing the work always, right? I mean, they're just sort of, and that's what we all decry, right? Where things are set from on high, and we're going to need this here, and we've determined you're going to be able to do this by, the holiday period or the trade show or whatever. And like, are you crazy? You must be nuts to think we could do X, Y, or Z all completely with any kind of quality. And so I'm not, defending that at all. In fact, I'm arguing against it. And in fact, the best The best argument for estimates in my mind is that they're the team's best defense against the on high arbitrary setting of objectives and timelines and whatever, because it's like, no, we've analyzed the work and we're not going to be able to get there. And you can find yourself another team if you think we are, but we're not. Everything you were just referring to there, I did listen to your other podcast. This one was the hidden value of estimates, I think from this week or in the last few days anyway. And I reject a lot of that, as you know. We had a little bit of discussion, I think, on Twitter.
Yes.
And because, from my point of view, yes, there are trade-offs that are made in any engineering endeavor. You don't design every single building to withstand a 11.0 earthquake, right? And so you do some kind of trade-offs in the course of doing things, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. Doing no trade-offs whatsoever, that can be a really bad thing, because it means that you're not exercising the engineering judgment about what's truly necessary for getting what you need in this particular case. So that to me is something which gets missed a lot when people go, oh no, we don't, you make compromises if you try to hit to an estimate. Well, maybe you want to make those compromises. Sometimes you see a team that refuses to compromise whatsoever, and that's not necessarily the right thing.
Yeah.
So, and then I completely reject, we could have a whole separate episode of this. The whole idea of necessary waste, to me, just makes me crazy. I call it Orwellian. I call it Carrollian, as in Lewis Carroll. I mean, like, necessary waste? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. So, when we were planning our move, my wife and I sat down and we brainstormed. Was that waste? Was it waste to do it? Why didn't we just sort of, call up the mover, say, come on Tuesday? Well, because we had to get all this stuff done before then. And the stuff had things that had required other stuff to be done before those things could be done. And we had to kind of think it through and lay it out, et cetera. And no, we didn't make a Gantt chart. No, we didn't make a 4,000 line project plan, but we itemized what it was that we needed to do and laid out what the dependencies were and figured out what we were going to need to do to get the whole thing done. So that's kind of my reaction, that lean doesn't help us here, in my mind.
Okay.
It doesn't let you dispense with planning, and it doesn't let you dispense with estimating, and they're intertwined.
Sure. So there are a lot of items there, and maybe I'll make the conversation loop quicker for a little bit here, just to kind of build maybe where we agree and don't agree, and find where the line is. So would you agree that in these use cases, or in these scenarios that I had shared here, that the team did not do time or size estimating?
No, I'll take you at your word. I think what I'm hearing is that they contributed to some assessment of that collaboratively with whoever was dictating that the work needed to be done and that you should work on that as opposed to something else.
Okay, great. And so that was there. Will you grant that that led to less time spent on coming up with those estimates?
Well, no, that's too sort of black and white a question, because I don't know how much time you spend collaboratively coming up with what amounts to some form of plan/estimate for how big the work was, right? And so I don't think that was a bad effort at all. I think that was a really important effort. This may have been the kind of effort that people were willing to just let it play out, let the line play out and see if the fish finally gets landed, right? And like I say, maybe it didn't matter all that much whether this team worked for 2 months or 4 months or 6 months to be able to get this thing done. I don't know. I'm not in your business.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe I'll be more specific. I will agree that time was spent laying out, so maybe like I'll go back to this phase, for example, laying out, the team did say, we will need a button and we will need a backend to do something to save the data. So the team spent time doing that, but they did not spend time saying, hey, before we start working on this, what estimate value do we give for each task or for the whole thing overall? So will you grant that the team did not spend time doing those things in regards to time or size estimates?
Well, I mean, you're asking a question that I think I've tried to answer, in that,
Yeah.
just because you didn't attach a number to it doesn't mean size was not considered,
Okay.
and that can be a whole bunch of ways where people go, oh my gosh, oh yeah, we're going to also need to do this. And oh, that always is hard and that's complicated and involves going into this external system and, whatever. And then the tenor of that conversation informs people's notion of size, even if you don't say it's a 3 or a 5 or an 8 or whatever, you don't attach a number to it. You're
Mhm.
having a discussion on the things that are going to let you gauge feasibility, what should be included, how big a capacity burn particular items are going to be, so you can decide not to do some things,
Mhm.
alike.
Okay.
What I also reject is the notion that oh yeah, we didn't think ahead of time that we were going to need to do X, Y, and Z, so no big deal, we'll just now do it. Well, okay, it depends what those things are, like, right? I mean,
Mhm.
imagine if our movers had arrived and, oh yeah, we didn't think that we needed to have things in boxes. Huh, right? It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, can you hold on while we put some things in boxes? So that wasn't going to work.
Yep. Yeah. So I do. So what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, you agree that the team estimated some things, like they would need boxes, but they didn't estimate like a quantity or of a size or a time to get the boxes or something like that. So some things were estimated, but some things weren't.
No, I mean, like I say, you are describing a culture where it is taboo to do that. I mean, it is. I mean, flatly speaking, it is taboo to talk about size or time or effort, right? I mean, because you say we don't do that, and therefore nobody does it. Of course, right? But so people have to sort of backdoor their way into, well, let's see how big this is and whether what we're talking about makes sense. And you think you can get this done because, gee, there's this other project that really wants your time too, and I mean,
Yeah,
so
so, yeah, I agree that we don't do it, but I would disagree that it's a taboo. It's more just like, hey, we've done a value stream analysis, and our experiment is to run is if we eliminate these parts of estimating from our process, does it optimize our flow, right? And so our observations is that it has, and that the negative side effects to the stakeholders or the customers is not there. And I think the one reason that might be is because you'd be like, well, you've been working on this forever and we don't know when it's going to be done, is that we start delivering pieces as soon as they're usable. So even if you go to the big the bigger thing that was done, is that pretty early on communication was sent to a box over voice, and the stakeholder or customer or whatever could hear that and see that happening. And instead of them trusting us because we've given an estimate and and that our estimate's going to come true, they could see the progress and see the progression, right? And so they could see like, oh wow, value is being generated now, or something that's very close to being valuable is done now. I'm very confident that in a short amount of time we'll have something that will be everything we need to deliver, right? And so I think I would disagree with the negative. I think let me just finish real quick. Disagree with the negative side effects of the team not being involved, because we are delivering, we're providing feedback on our progress and where we're at, and then they can try and do it themselves and see the value. And maybe they estimate like, hey, then we'll, because of how it's going, we'll do this or that, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Every team I've ever been on, especially when I was a full-time developer, the whole notion of someone else telling me, I'm very confident that you're going to have this done next week, that would just make me crazy. What makes you so confident? Yes, I've given you chunks A, B, C, and D, and you've liked those so far, but unless we have a discussion about what is still left to do for you to be able to roll it out to more than 1 or 2 beta customers, because if that's, beta customers don't count. Really, right? They're great. It's a great step. I don't, reject it at all, but they don't count in terms of actual delivery. So yeah, I think that's a key difference between us. I think it's important to involve the team, and I submit that the team probably was more involved, but that people had to go on gut and supposition. And I believe in transparency and some level of not just table pounding, not just the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion, deciding that this is going to be done or not done. I believe in people being challenged, so to speak, respectfully challenged in saying, well, what are you basing that confidence in that we're going to have this done soon? Show your work, in essence, as opposed to simply table pounding or, really being, conviction sure of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and that's fair. And I think I'll say one more thing, and then I think I'll hold my tongue in light of time. But is that anytime that has happened, where someone says like, "Oh, by how you're doing, I think it's going to be this now," we always, the response I've always seen is, "Oh, wow, that's fascinating that you think it'll be like that." For me, honestly, I don't know what it's going to take, but we're going to do a good job to make maintainable software, and we'll show you each piece as we're going along. And you can make up your mind as you go, but we're not committing to the date you just said, and we're just going to keep doing a good job and giving you the results every day. And that conversation has gone really well because we are being very transparent. I think you used that word before, on where we're at and where things are going, and we're not, and it's not offensive for someone else to make an estimate, because it's like, oh, well, that's interesting you think that. I honestly don't know, and that's my honest opinion. But it does not negative impact on me in any way. So response to that, and then any closing comments before we close out the show for today.
I mean, I guess my response to that is chalk on a blackboard for me was saying, I'm not making any commitment about when we'll have it done. It's your deal. Oh, it's interesting you think that. I mean, to me, that's not really collaboration. It's like trying to figure out, look, the customers are asking us about this. Our salespeople are asking us about this. Our marketing people want to know if they can put this in the brochure because it's going to undercut the competition's offering in this particular thing, and if you're not doing that, if you're saying, well, I don't know, I'm not signing up for anything, you decide, if we're going to have it done, and it's on your shoulders, that to me is not a responsible general stance. And all respectfully said, but I would not want to operate in a company that way.
Yeah, and so the flip that I've seen be done in certain contexts is you don't sell or market something that's not done. So then you don't say like, hey, customers, we're going to have this in so many months. It's just, and I see a lot of companies taking that approach. So it's not just a very limited scope for that. And that'd be outside of this time box to share more about that kind of marketing sales flip.
I mean, that's a bad thing. It's a bad thing taken to an extreme, but it's also a bad thing taken to the extreme of, we're not committing to anything. Who knows? It's up to you, right? And so those are twin ends of the spectrum, both of which I reject.
Right, understood. Well, any closing comments on the wrap up before we close out?
Just reiterating, I really appreciate these conversations. We got by without either of us calling the other an idiot, while also, I think, clearly disagreeing, clearly having a different stance, and that's okay. I mean, I think you're wrong, and you think I'm wrong, and that's okay. And we're able to keep it at these upper levels of the pyramid. That's what's been sorely lacking in discussion of these topics and similar topics on forums like Twitter and in the blogosphere.
Right on. Well, thank you all for hearing us out. Thank you, Peter. It's been a lot of fun, and looking forward to the next Respectful Disagreement. And we appreciate everyone's feedback. And please keep it in the radical candor and higher part of the pyramid. And we really appreciate everyone's time. And until next time, have a good one, everybody. Bye.
Thanks.